No, of course I'm in it. I
come
admire you.
on,
I think you're a fine actor, and
You called me a well-known troublemaker.
did you listen to the model? You heard that?
I heard.
Johnny Carson ruled late-night television like no one before or since. Night after night, millions tuned in expecting laughs, charm, and smooth interviews. But behind the polished desk and effortless grin, some moments on The Tonight Show spiraled so wildly out of control that even Carson himself was left stunned. These weren't rehearsed bits or harmless bloopers. These were real, raw, jaw-dropping moments that shocked audiences, rattled guests, and nearly derailed live television forever. From guests who showed up intoxicated or emotionally unstable, to sudden on-air meltdowns, dangerous stunts, and unexpected confessions, Carson's stage became the setting for chaos no producer could predict. Cameras kept rolling as tension filled the studio, laughter turned uneasy, and America watched in disbelief. Some moments were funny in hindsight. Others were deeply uncomfortable. A few were so extreme they were never talked about again. Carson was a master at control, yet even he couldn't always rein in the madness unfolding in front of him. His quick wit saved many situations, but not all of them. Certain nights pushed the boundaries of live television, exposing the risks of putting fame, ego, and unpredictability together under bright studio lights. These moments didn't just shock audiences, they changed late-night TV forever. Rules were rewritten, guests were screened differently. And Carson himself learned that even legends can lose control when chaos walks onto the stage. These are the 16 most insane moments on Johnny Carson that will shock you, and once you hear them, you'll never see The Tonight Show the same way again. Johnny Carson was known for control. Every pause, every raised eyebrow, every perfectly timed joke was calculated to keep late-night television running smoothly. That's why the first truly insane moment to shake The Tonight Show caught everyone off guard, including Carson himself. It was one of those nights that started normally, with laughter humming through the studio and the audience relaxed in their seats. No one suspected they were about to witness a moment that would test the limits of live television. The guest appeared confident at first, smiling, waving, and settling into the chair like they'd done it 100 times before. But as the interview progressed, something felt off. Answers stretched too long. Jokes landed awkwardly. Carson's famous grin tightened just slightly, the subtle signal that he sensed trouble. Viewers at home couldn't quite name it, but they felt it. The rhythm was broken. Then the mood shifted completely. The guests began speaking in circles, interrupting Carson, veering into stories that made producers visibly nervous behind the cameras. What was meant to be playful banter turned tense. Carson attempted to steer the conversation back on course, but every redirection was ignored. The audience laughter thinned, replaced by uneasy murmurs. This wasn't comedy anymore, it was unpredictability, unfolding in real time. The breaking point came when the guest made a shocking on-air admission that clearly hadn't been approved. Carson froze for a fraction of a second, an eternity in live television. His eyes flicked toward the producer's booth. The band stopped playing. The studio felt suspended in disbelief. Millions of viewers watched as Carson was forced to decide, shut it down or save the show. He chose survival. With lightning-fast wit, Carson cracked a joke sharp enough to cut through the tension. The audience laughed, grateful for relief, but the damage was done. The guests continued spiraling, emboldened by the attention, pushing boundaries even further. At one point, Carson physically leaned away, subtly signaling discomfort, something longtime viewers had never seen him do. Producers were now scrambling. Commercial breaks were moved up. Cameramen were instructed to cut wide shots. Stagehands hovered just out of view. This was no longer an interview, it was containment. Carson's role shifted from host to handler, desperately trying to keep the situation from collapsing entirely. When the segment finally ended, the applause felt forced. Carson smiled, thanked the guests, and moved on like nothing had happened. But backstage, the mood was grim. Staff later admitted they feared the episode would end Carson's streak of flawless control. Network executives were furious. Viewers flooded stations with calls the next morning, demanding to know what they had just witnessed. That night changed everything. From then on, guest screening became stricter. Alcohol policies were enforced. Delays were reconsidered. The illusion that Carson could handle anything was cracked, just slightly, but enough to remind everyone how fragile live television really is. If the first incident rattled The Tonight Show, the second one truly frightened it. This wasn't awkward tension or a spiraling conversation. It was a moment where control slipped so badly that producers feared for everyone's safety. It began as a highly anticipated appearance, the kind that drew strong ratings and enthusiastic applause the moment the guest walked on stage. Johnny Carson welcomed them with his usual ease, unaware that the night was about to cross a line late-night television had never faced before. From the start, the guests' energy was volatile. Their movements were erratic, their laughter too loud, their eyes constantly scanning the studio as if daring something to happen. Carson sensed it immediately. His jokes became shorter, his posture more alert. He attempted to ground the interview, but the guests seemed uninterested in conversation. They wanted spectacle, and they had brought it with them. Without warning, the guest reached beneath the chair and produced an object that instantly changed the temperature of the room. Gasps rippled through the audience. Crew members stiffened. Carson's smile vanished. Though the item was meant to be shocking rather than harmful, no one in the studio could be sure of that in the moment. Live television had suddenly become unpredictable in the most dangerous way possible. Carson reacted with rare seriousness. He raised his hand slightly, not as a joke, but as a signal. His voice dropped, calm but firm, urging the guest to put the object away. For a split second, it seemed the situation might stabilize. Then the guest laughed and escalated, pushing boundaries with reckless confidence. The audience, once thrilled, now sat frozen in silence. Behind the cameras, producers were panicking. Security moved closer to the stage. Stage managers prepared to cut the feed if necessary. Carson's legendary composure was being tested unlike ever before. He attempted humor, but it landed hollow. This wasn't a bit anymore, it was a risk. What made the moment unforgettable was Carson's restraint. He didn't explode. He didn't shout. He stared directly at the guest, unblinking, and delivered a line so sharp and controlled that it cut through the chaos instantly. The message was clear: stop now or this ends badly. The guest hesitated. The studio held its breath. Finally, the object was removed. Applause erupted, not from joy, but from relief. Carson quickly steered the conversation to safer ground, but the damage was irreversible. The audience's trust had been shaken. The producers knew they had narrowly avoided disaster. After the show, the fallout was immediate. Network executives demanded explanations. New rules were drafted overnight. Props were banned unless pre-approved. Security presence was increased. Carson himself reportedly insisted on stricter guest vetting, making it clear that surprise was no longer worth the risk. Viewers talked about the incident for years, many remembering exactly where they were when it happened. Some praised Carson's calm under pressure. Others questioned why the situation was allowed to happen at all. But everyone agreed on one thing. They had witnessed a moment where live television teetered on the edge of catastrophe. And the most unsettling truth was this: if Johnny Carson, the master of control, could be pushed that far, then anything was possible. What followed would be even more unhinged. By the time this third insane moment unfolded, Johnny Carson and his producers believed they had seen it all. The new rules were in place, guest screenings were tighter, and surprises were supposedly under control. That illusion shattered on a night that proved unpredictability doesn't always come from props or stunts. Sometimes it comes from raw emotion that no rulebook can contain. The guest that evening was not controversial, not volatile by reputation, and certainly not considered a risk. In fact, they were invited precisely because of their calm demeanor and respected career. The interview began smoothly. Carson leaned back, relaxed, trading easy laughs with the audience. It felt safe, comfortable, exactly the kind of segment that allowed everyone to breathe again after earlier disasters. Then, without warning, the tone shifted. A simple question, meant to be nostalgic, opened a door no one realized was still bleeding. The guest paused. Too long. Carson gently attempted to move on, but it was too late. Emotion flooded the stage. The guest's voice cracked, their hands trembled, and suddenly they were confessing deeply personal pain live on national television. At first, the audience responded with soft murmurs of empathy. Carson leaned forward, abandoning jokes entirely. This was unfamiliar territory. Late-night television wasn't built for vulnerability, it was built for laughs. Yet the guests continued, revealing heartbreak, addiction, regret, and guilt that had never been spoken publicly before. The studio grew eerily quiet. Even the band remained frozen. Carson was trapped in an impossible position. Interrupting would appear cruel. Allowing it to continue risked exploiting a breakdown in real time. He chose compassion. His voice softened. His posture changed. The comedian disappeared, replaced by a human being trying to guide another through a moment of collapse. The confession grew darker. Names were hinted at. Industry secrets hovered just beneath the surface. Producers signaled frantically, but Carson ignored them. Cutting away would have felt inhumane, yet every second increased the danger. The audience at home was no longer entertained, they were witnessing something intimate and deeply uncomfortable. When the guest finally stopped speaking, tears streaming down their face, the silence was unbearable. Carson broke it carefully, thanking them for their honesty and gently steering the show into a commercial break earlier than scheduled. The applause that followed was hesitant, conflicted, unsure whether clapping was even appropriate. Backstage, panic set in. Lawyers reviewed transcripts. Executives debated damage control. The guest was escorted out quietly, shielded from press. Carson sat alone in his dressing room longer than usual that night. Those close to him later said it shook him deeply. He had always believed television should never cross certain lines, and that night, it had crossed one he couldn't uncross. Viewers were divided. Some praised the moment as brave and authentic. Others criticized the show for allowing someone to unravel publicly. Newspapers debated whether Carson had shown compassion or lost control. For the first time, The Tonight Show wasn't being discussed for comedy, it was being questioned for ethics. That moment forced a reckoning. Producers introduced new safeguards for emotional distress. Topics were screened more carefully. Carson himself became more cautious, avoiding questions that might reopen old wounds. The lesson was brutal, but clear. Chaos doesn't always explode, it can quietly unravel. This wasn't spectacle. It wasn't shock for shock's sake. It was a reminder that live television can turn deeply human in ways no one is prepared for. And the most disturbing part? This was only moment number 3. By the time this fourth moment aired. The Tonight Show had already survived chaos, danger, and emotional collapse. But nothing prepared Johnny Carson or America for a night when comedy crossed into cruelty, and laughter curdled into shock. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a breakdown. It was intentional, and that's what made it unforgettable. The guest that evening was known for being edgy, provocative, and deliberately confrontational. Carson had invited them knowing the risks, confident he could handle anything. The audience buzzed with anticipation as the guest walked out, already smirking, already performing. From the first exchange, it was clear they weren't there to promote anything. They were there to dominate the room. The jokes came fast and sharp, but they weren't playful. They targeted other celebrities, then shifted toward people who weren't present to defend themselves. Carson laughed politely at first, attempting to redirect. But the guest ignored every cue. Each punchline went lower, darker, more personal. The audience laughed nervously, unsure whether they were supposed to enjoy what they were hearing. Then the line was crossed. The guest made a remark so cruel, so deliberately humiliating toward a specific individual that the studio fell into stunned silence. No laughter, no gasps, just shock. Carson's face hardened instantly. For one of the rarest times in television history, he dropped the mask entirely. Carson interrupted mid-sentence. Calm, direct, unsmiling. He told the guests that the comment was unacceptable and would not be laughed off. The audience erupted not in humor, but applause. They weren't cheering comedy. They were cheering a boundary being drawn live on air. The guests tried to recover with sarcasm, mocking Carson for being too sensitive. That only made things worse. Carson leaned forward, eyes locked, and delivered a response so controlled and cutting that it ended the segment instantly. He thanked the guests, signaled the band, and moved on without another word. The camera caught the guest's smirk finally fade. Backstage, the fallout was explosive. Producers argued. Executives demanded explanations. The guest was never invited back. Carson reportedly made it clear that talent did not excuse cruelty and that the show would not be used as a platform to humiliate others for shock value. Viewers were divided. Some accused Carson of censorship. Others praised him for drawing a line when no one else would. But everyone remembered the moment. It became one of the earliest examples of a late-night host openly confronting a guest's behavior, instead of hiding behind humor. That night changed Carson. He became more selective, more willing to shut things down rather than let them spiral. The lesson was harsh but necessary. Live television magnifies intention. When someone chooses cruelty, it doesn't stay contained, it poisons the room. Moment 4 wasn't wild because it was chaotic. It was wild because it revealed something far more dangerous. How easily entertainment can turn harmful when no one says stop. And Johnny Carson did.